Okay, I'd like to call the order of the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, November 15th, 2021 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Garfino?
Here.
Trustee Carroll?
Here.
Trustee Curtis? Here. Trustee Gately?
Here.
Trustee Lowry?
Here.
Trustee Nedved?
Here.
And Trustee Salazar? Here.
Okay, thank you. Audience comments? Trustee comments? Okay, under discussion, item 1, Steve.
Thank you. Item number 1 is solar energy panel text amendments. And if you remember, we've changed the solar panel code a couple times in the past few years. Currently, we're at a point where the board wanted to relook at it and potentially allowing it at 100% of the full roof line, no matter which way the roof faces. And if this gets moved forward, it would go to the village board for a vote. And Mike's going to walk us through it.
Yeah, some of the specifics of the 2018 text amendments that Steve referred to is the panels could never face the front of the house. And then at that point in time, they couldn't cover more than 25% of the roof. In 2018, we did text amendments to remove the percentage, but we still said the solar panels couldn't face the front or, and as adopted in 2018, face the corner side yard either. So there was no percentage requirement or limitation. However, as we stand right now, solar panels just cannot face the street or the corner side yard, being a street in of itself. This went through the plan commission, the village board. There were discussions about allowing it. Even at that time, there was support for allowing 100%. I did speak to an area appraiser or assessor at that point, asked them about any negative context to regard to property value with collection panels. And their response was simply that it didn't diminish or add any value to a property or to a neighboring property. So I did look into that as part of the previous amendments. So as it stands right now, I did draft a draft ordinance that basically allows, as Steve had mentioned, solar panels to be on any roof plane. So now they could be in the front, the back, the corner side yard. We do actually, in order to facilitate this text amendment, we do have to go to the plan commission for a formal public hearing. And we did actually post a public hearing before the plan commission for December 7th.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think as we go into the future and energy methods and different situations change, I think we need to be on top of that. So I think that's a great idea.
I agree.
I think it's great going to the future. The more as it becomes more and more affordable, and I think more people will do it, and it will be not a here nor there as far as the property value and the aesthetic goes.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the change.
I think people are more used to seeing them now too, as they you're more accustomed to. I have one in my neighborhood on the side, but you can see it going back and forth, and you don't really notice it anymore. So.
And as Mike said, just a quick thing. This is based on the board feedback we got when a resident spoke at the last meeting, and the fact that we were one step away from being 100% solar on all sides of the roof. We expedited this process by bringing it to COW first, because it does take a plan commission. So the goal is tonight, plan commission first week of December, and then final vote to village board at the plan commission has no concerns, would be the third week of December. Very good.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Item 2, Steve.
Item number 2, Mike is going to walk us through a new development being proposed over at the corner of Randall and Oak.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll take it to the board if the board wants to move forward.
Yeah, so what we're looking for tonight is feedback on petition 21-10, which is the amendment to the Randall Square PUD. Namely, there is a 2-lot development on parcel 6, which would be located directly south, and we'll get to the presentation, which will show the illustration. Parcel 5 is the corner, the northeast corner of the development. Parcel 6 is just south of that. Parcel 5 is where Casey's was approved by the village board. So parcel 6, they're looking to split the property and put a inline retail space or commercial space and then office space adjacent to Miller Drive in the back. So there are a couple of board actions needed to facilitate this that have already gone to plan commission. The plan commission did recommend approval of the petition. And we did actually go ahead and get the plan commission minutes up to speed. So that way you had a greater context of what that discussion actually was, as opposed to paraphrasing it here. But in what we had done with the request is they're required to amend the PUD, which is a special use in of itself, because they are deviating in two different ways. The one being that there's a freestanding sign. The sign meets all the height and width requirements allowed for a freestanding sign, but the identifying area within the sign, meaning the text, the logo, is actually being exceeded. I think it's going from 32 square feet to 36 square feet. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Casey's was approved at 46 square feet. So it's kind of in line with what's been approved in that area. The big request as part of the PUD amendment is the reduction of the 50-foot landscape yard around the perimeter of the development. As of right now, there's a 50-foot landscape yard, which would be from the property line into the property that's required along Oak Street and along Randall. This is actually is part of the PUD, but also too is a requirement of the major thoroughfares in North Aurora: Orchard Road, Randall Road, Oak Street, 31, 25. All the developments are subject to that 50-foot landscape buffer easement. That was actually approved as part of the Casey's. Casey's did receive a reduction for that. And also too, this would sort of be in line with what Casey's asking, or excuse me, what the developers asked for was similar to what Casey's had approved, and that they're asking for the reduction to facilitate parking and drive aisles. So it would not include any building space or like that, just a reduction of that landscape yard so you could push the parking closer to the street, and inversely also to the development could be pushed closer to the right of way for greater visibility. So those are the amendments to the PUD. Being that it's new commercial or non-residential development, site plan approval is required. Also too, the subdivision, the PUD actually allows within itself certain rights to do subdividing without certain approvals. We took a conservative route, but it just says that each lot has to be a minimum of an acre, which this does meet that. So again, we have a development here that originally in the preliminary plan was shown as a standalone restaurant, which was a permitted use. The uses that they're looking to do are permitted under the PUD and the zoning ordinance currently. They just need the particular approvals with regard to the PUD to establish the development of that parcel 6 being divided. So with that, I'll go ahead and have the developer come up, give their presentation, and answer any questions you might have.
I do have a real quick question, Mike. What's the difference between the 50-foot buffer and what they're asking? What is that amount?
They're asking for 15 feet. I apologize. So it would be reduced to 15 feet.
Wow.
To allow for parking and drive aisle only. And keep in mind, there are areas in that there are parking lot landscape islands that are required to be in parking lot island and areas. So there still would be landscaping in that area. And I do believe it's part of the slide they'll show some of the landscape plans associated with that. So go ahead and presentation.
Good evening. My name is Jason Dorn. I'm counsel for Randall Oaks LLC, which is the developer of the site. There are 11 lots in this development. One of them is the retention pond. My client owns 8 of the other 9. Is it correct?
10 out of the 11. Right?
10 out of the 11?
Yeah.
Okay. So 10 out of the 11. I know one of them is a pond, but and so we're here to answer questions.
Yeah. So we can go to the next slide. So Mike did a really good. Mike did a really good job at wrapping up kind of the summary of what we're looking to do here. So these slides, a couple of them are redundant, so we can go ahead and go to the next. So as Jason kind of mentioned, the parcels that are included as part of this development are shown on this map here, which gives you an idea of what we're talking about and which lots and the development in general, just to give you an overview. If we go to the next slide, we'll kind of touch on a couple of the major topics that Mike has kind of highlighted already here. So we're looking to subdivide parcel 6 into 2 separate lots in order to accommodate a retail building and an office building. Right now it is 1 parcel. So in order to build 2 separate buildings, we just need to go through that subdivision process. And then the special use, as Mike mentioned, all we're looking to do is change the zoning name from a standalone restaurant to multi-commercial. And it is already zoned B2 district, if I'm not mistaken. And then the other item that we're looking to do, aside from the signage, is the building and yard setback variance. And if we go to the next slide, we'll kind of present this in a fashion. So parcel 6, this is just illustrating how we're looking to subdivide it. We're looking to subdivide it from north to south, just to create 2 different parcels. And then the next slide will show, apologies, it's hard to see a little bit, but you can see on that parcel 6, we have a retail and a office building. The retail would be on the east side and the office building would be on the west side of that parcel. So that's why we're looking to obviously separate the parcels. On the right-hand side of the slide is a quick landscape plan that shows some of the landscape buffers, some of the islands for landscaping as well. And it kind of shows you a little bit of how the road would look from the city's property, from Randall Road and into our parking lot. We did accommodate and we put more parking stalls than what is customary and what is required by the village code to accommodate for the setback that we're asking for. So we've, I believe we've almost doubled what the current requirement is for that. And if we go to the next slide, this just gives you another perspective. Along the parking in front of the retail, you see there's a dotted line with some arrows. That's the 50-foot setback that's currently in place. It's a building and yard setback. What we're looking to do is request a 15-foot yard setback and then keeping the 50-foot building setback in place. Casey's is that building on the right-hand side. That is the gas station. And so one of the reasons we're looking to have that setback pushed to 15 feet is to stay consistent with what their setback is. So then our drive aisles are in alignment, our sidewalks are in alignment, landscaping buffers. But then also, as you look at our parcel, it's slim and long, so which makes for a funky building design if we were to keep this as one parcel and create a retail building or even a standalone restaurant if that was the case. So it makes the land to be difficult to develop unless we separate it the way we are. And by separating it the way we are, because of our 1 acre requirement per parcel, it makes it difficult to build a building on that parcel along Randall Road without having that setback reduced. So that's one of the reasons why we're pushing for that. Another reason is based on our market research, doing a office building is actually in higher demand than the retail. We are building the retail as we have a Dunkin' Donuts under contract to take one of the spaces that are anchor tenant, and then we're going to market the rest for lease. But we wanted to keep the retail as a smaller space versus going large scale retail that would match other retail developments in the area. We've had a high demand for smaller 2,000 square foot, 1,500 square foot office users that are looking to put their small office into some of these buildings. We currently own 2 10,000 square foot buildings on this land already, and we've historically been 95% or 100% occupied for our entire ownership thus far. So those are kind of a few of the reasons why we're pushing for this setback variance. Anything to add to that before we kind of step to the next slide? Okay. So we put some renderings together to give you a concept of what these buildings would look like. So this is the retail building. We put Dunkin' Donuts there just to represent which area they're planning to take within this. And then we're looking to build out 1 spec space, and then the rest would be based on what type of tenants we bring to the market. We are trying to create a separate identity for the office and the retail building, as we'll show you here.
I have a
the next-
question about
Yes.
the retail. On the facade, what materials are on that facade? Because I'll be honest, I'd like to see a little bit more architectural detail in that area.
So architectural detail in terms of the EVIS and the actual design of the elevations, or as in the material, because What we have currently on the front would be a brick under the windows. And then what you have is you have a limestone along the columns going vertical. And then there's I don't remember the material off the top of my head, but there's a paintable material that would go on the face of the building as well. So what exactly are
Well, I'd like to see a little bit more ornamentation, a little bit more of maybe an upscale look, not, I mean, when you take a look at I think, what is our median income in the village? 80,000 plus. I mean, we're kind of a upper middle class suburb, and I'd like to see our retail reflect that as well.
And our intention is to make these nice buildings. I think if we go to the next slide, you'll see a realistic rendering. One more, please. So this gives you a little bit more of a realistic rendering. And I mean, having the stone finish with the limestone, I mean, those are higher end finishes in
I
my
guess my
opinion.
problem is it's very boxy.
Okay.
It's very cookie cutter. You see 1,000 of these driving down Randall Road. I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more effort on your part, whatever you can do to give it a little bit more detail, ornamentation. That's a very high visibility corner. So I'd like to see it look a little bit nicer.
Thank you. We'll take that with our architect and have him come up with some additional designs as well. One of the difficulties is we are trying to hide a lot of the mechanical equipment on the roof as well. So that's a consideration that we have to take into consideration for this design. And that's why we've done some of the elevations to help hide some of that equipment. And also there's building height requirements that we have to stay within. But we'll take that under advisement to see what alternatives we can come up with.
This is the building that's this is the building that's gonna front on Randall Road, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I like the fact you got a Dunkin' Donuts as an anchor.
Thank you.
Good job on that, because Dunkin' Donuts is a sustainable business that is gonna be great for that location.
Yeah, and they're excited to open right away as soon as we can get this
Good job.
development up and started.
What'd you have in mind for some of the retail shops? What kind of retail? What do you mean?
It could be anything, to be honest. I think that the market is going to speak for itself. We can't tell what businesses are going to be in there, but I think it could be anything from an insurance office to a nail salon to a small restaurant. I think these spaces give you the flexibility for whatever type of retail we can be able to fill in these sites. Ultimately, I mean, finding local businesses that would succeed because of the visibility off of Randall Road and the natural traffic that we get in that area. I would hope that we can partner up with some of those tenants.
I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, obviously I like a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that there. Like I've mentioned in the past with other developments, I'm just concerned with vacant buildings. There's plenty of those already in the village, and I'm not against building anything. I'm happy that, it's gonna get developed. My concern would be you build it and then we got 3-4 more vacant office spaces just sitting out there for a while. So that would be my concern personally.
For the office or the retail?
I'm sorry, the retail spaces, the other 4 units.
And I think that's why we've decided to go with smaller scale versus building this building to be double or triple the size. Is so then you can phase this over a period of time and you're not dealing with a 50,000 or 80,000 square foot retail building. You're dealing with an 8,000 or 10,000 square foot retail building, and to get 6 tenants versus 20 is much easier accomplishment, in my opinion. And that's why we're looking at having the mix of the office as well. What we found works well in a lot of our experiences. A lot of the times the office buildings will supplement the retail and help drive lunch and dinner reservations and they can kind of work in tandem with one another to succeed. And from surveying our existing tenants, when we've talked to them about bringing some retail to this hard corner where they can have the ability to walk there and have a picnic table and go and eat lunch outside, they've all been ecstatic about that. If we go to the, sorry. Okay, if we go to the next slide, we can show the office side. So we're trying to follow a similar theme of the retail with the elevations and with the windows and finishes, except give it a little bit of a different color tone. So then it stands out as office versus retail. But this is the initial plan of what we're looking to do, is have it broken down into 5 different suites. These suites could be in varying size depending on what the demand calls for at that point. This building wouldn't have any common corridors or anything like that. Everyone would have their own separate entrances. And with COVID, this has become a big demand in the market right now, is each of the tenants actually having their own entry and their own bathrooms, to where they don't have to go through a common corridor and deal with other tenants in the building that may not have the same policies or procedures that this specific tenant may. So that's why we've kind of designed this building to be this way as well. And we've seen success in that in other developments that we've had in the past. Yeah. And we can show a couple more elevations from the side and back of the building as well. And then there's a realistic rendering for this next picture. And it shows how it aligns with the retail building somewhat. But like I said, each tenant would have a separate entryway on each side of the building, and then the secondary emergency egress point as well. Any questions about the office building versus retail building? And
I have a question about the office building. I think the building itself looks nice, and I like the plan. The question I have is kind of goes along with what Trustee Nedved said earlier. I mean, with COVID and what it's done to offices throughout the country, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be a mass exodus back to the office when COVID is finally over. I assume you've done the market research to show that you can fill this space, but to me, building another office space without knowing that it's going to be full, is that something that we really want to do?
Our portfolio, we have about 2 million square feet of office and industrial buildings, ranging around 180 tenants. We've only seen an impact from less than 5% actually making a decision to permanently close their office, or have made the decision to have gone out of business. So we haven't seen a big impact throughout all of our office and industrial buildings. Even right now, we're signing new leases. We're still getting activity to fill some of our existing buildings. I don't foresee it being an issue. Obviously, when we're underwriting this deal, we have to look at this in holding the fact that it's going to take us a little bit longer to fill, because we want to build in that risk and make sure that we have the backing behind that. But I don't foresee any issues with getting it to the point where we need to be, even pre-COVID.
Okay.
And there's smaller spots too, Trustee Carroll.
Exactly.
So they're smaller, they're marketable, and in my professional opinion, just being out there, those will rent out and they'll be leased up. There's not much commercial space leased that's small anywhere in the county, actually. So you're in a good selling point for what you're going to market. And then, and obviously you're investing a lot of money into the project. You want to invest, millions of dollars if you didn't think you can rent it.
And the site has been good for office space. As Ramsey mentioned, it's 95% leased. The other 2 buildings are 95% leased and have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, the plan commission recommended approval. As you'll see in the minutes too, this majority of the discussion revolved around just the area traffic, which they did a traffic study in conjunction with Casey's. They would be sharing the access drive going between Casey's to the south, then to the north, connecting to Miller Drive, and then Voss to the south. So a lot of that area road network is already existence. They would just be working with Casey on that shared drive aisle to the north of their property.
Yeah, it looks nice. I'm glad to see something finally happening there. It's been a long time vacant, so.
And then the next slide would show what we're looking to do as for the monument sign. We are just updating what the monument sign in the PUD has. As Mike mentioned, it's a little bit higher on square footage, just so we can have some even numbers. But we're just trying to update it to match the building designs as well, and change what was in the PUD slightly.
You know, I did have one other question, Mike, for you. There is a sidewalk, right, that will wrap around that entire property now, connecting all the way up to Summerwind. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there was, as part of this development, the PUD requires a sidewalk along Randall and Oak. But yeah, so it would eventually get put in. I think there's a condition of the staff report that requires it based upon each lot being developed. And I think the Casey's development was required to put in that lot, bridge the gap between lot 4 and 5. So that way there would be a sidewalk now contiguous from Oak all the way down to Windstone. So as these properties develop, they will be required to put the sidewalks in as they move south.
That's great. The sidewalk there ends right now at Summerwind, and those people have no way to get to the corner without having to cross right over. So I'm glad it's happening.
Walk to Casey's.
Yep.
Any other questions for us?
No, looks good.
It looks good. Yep, thank you.
I'm in favor of it.
Yep, we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, item 3, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 3 on the agenda is the purpose of this conversation is due to the inordinate amount of time it's taking to get trucks that we've been ordering. We're going to be looking outside of our normal purchasing procurement practices, and we're going to run it by the board tonight to see if we can have some flexibility. And John's going to take it from there.
Yeah, just to go into a little greater detail with our vehicles, we've been having kind of some issues with supply chain just in general. One of the trucks we sent off to be repaired has been sitting in the shop for 2 months just because they couldn't get a part to put on it. So in the interim, the mechanic went to a junkyard to grab a part that was probably going to work and limp this vehicle along until we could go ahead and get it repaired and functional again to the way it needs to be. And kind of to repeat what Steve's saying, we're just asking for a little help or some flexibility of trying to find a way we can get our operations up to where they need to be right now. We're sitting on 3 vehicles that are still back ordered right now. We did get word today from our Freightliner that the vehicle has been delivered, and now we just have to wait for it to be built over at Monroe. But that still looks, we ordered that vehicle on January 4th of this year, and it still probably won't be available for us until March of next year. So it's going to be about another 112 days before we get it. So we're looking at probably about 370 days before that vehicle was actually delivered since the time we had ordered it. Similarly, our international that we just ordered in May probably won't be here till May of 2022. And even a Ford Explorer these days, right now, we ordered a Ford Explorer in June. That's going to be Brandon's vehicles, so we can get out and do surveying and some engineering work. We're told that that's the earliest that's coming now is January 1 of 2022. So in the past, what we've done, our practice has been to work through either the state purchase program or a municipal aggregate program where we can kind of leverage the buying power of other municipalities and state agencies. And after speaking with that representative from Monroe today, he said that any vehicles that we order today wouldn't be ready or delivered to be built until the first quarter of 2023. So those vehicles are pushed way out right now when you're ordering them on spec, according to our supplier. So we're kind of exploring other options that we can use. And right now, when we are looking around just at stuff that's on the lots at some of the dealerships, and it's not like your average Ford dealership or Chevy where you can go and pick one of these trucks out. There are places though, like Monroe and Bunnell and some places in Springfield that have service trucks, which is the next truck we're going to be looking for the water department available. It's not going to be exactly what we need. It might not be the right color, and it might not have all the functions, but it would get us in a position where we could get our new employee in a truck and have all his equipment ready and out and doing his job and not waiting to order one. So the cost of that is increasing, and it's two things. It's going to be basically vehicles are harder to come by and there's more competition to get them. So the prices are increasing, but it's also, you know, the options are going to be maybe a little bit more expensive, maybe less. I don't know exactly where we're going to end up on price. But the purpose is just kind of to give the administrator, the village administrator, the authority, should we find a vehicle at one of these dealerships, that we'd be able to act on it if it was a reasonable price. Because right now we're finding that if we wanted to purchase a vehicle, they're going so quickly that by the time we'd be able to contact the dealership, say, hey, we're interested in this vehicle, would you hold it or could you hold it? And then present it to the village board, that vehicle could be gone within that time frame. So we're kind of asking for the flexibility of allowing the village administrator to act within reason on purchasing a vehicle that we could use for that water employee. It would be a service vehicle with NAPHED cabinets on it, similar to all the others. And the costs that we were researching, we were seeing, we have in the memo between 50 and 65,000. We had budgeted 46,000. The vehicles, I don't think we're going to get up to that 65,000 range. I think 60,000 was probably kind of where we were topping off at. But we were asking to go above budget by that additional amount and to give the administrator the authority to enter into that agreement so we can get the process of getting that vehicle here.
I think to clarify, I want to point out a couple of things. So it's not necessarily a Ford Explorer that we care about so much. I mean, unless it's a squad for the police department. But for Brandon, I mean, we'll try to make it work with whatever pickups we have available if we have to. What we're really talking about is the flexibility of, John alluded to Monroe. When he's talking about Monroe, the two trucks that he's talking about that are going to be a year to a year and a half by the time we get them are dump trucks for plowing. So like those are significant operational trucks that we are waiting for right now. And then this water truck is another specialized vehicle. And as John was saying, the budget amount is not a guaranteed amount, right? So the budget amount is what we estimate the value of that vehicle to be at the time of purchase based on our research. What John's saying is out of $45,000 is what we budgeted. We have seen a couple trucks that are being available quickly. I want to say they range between 50 and 60. So in theory, even if we went to state purchase, it's no guarantee that we would be under 46 anyways. So what John's saying is instead of ordering one, let's say right at 45, 46, wait a year potentially to get one. This is an actual service vehicle that would be used by a water employee with all of the equipment that they need in that specialized equipment on the back of the truck. And we might be able to get it quickly within a few weeks.
Yes, I'm fine. I think it's a good idea.
I'm fine with it too.
I mean, you need a truck, you gotta get your truck.
So
I'm in
that what
favor
would
of it.
happen is we would go to village board at the next meeting and essentially you would just have a resolution that would grant me some parameters to allow me to go outside of our normal procurement practices for specific things. And in this case, we're asking for one specific item, the truck for the water department. So it's not crazy. We're not asking for, blanket purchasing of everything, just this one truck.
I'm in favor of it.
I'm good.
Okay. Thanks, John. Item 4, Steve.
Okay. Item number 4 is a topic that is semi-complicated. So we decided to put a PowerPoint together to try to walk through this together as a group. Mr. Ernst is going to put that PowerPoint on the screen and then we're going to move forward. Okay. So last time we came to the board, we were talking about video gaming and we were recapping the village's rules as to where we are with our liquor code. And just for reference, if everyone remembers, this is something that comes up periodically every couple of years. Our code currently restricts gaming to restaurants, microbreweries, and taverns. And it does so by a portion of the code that talks about seating requirements and kitchens and cooks. And so, but none of it is very specific or standardized, so to speak. So it leaves the staff to a lot of discretion, where at times we feel like we're not sure that we're in line with exactly what the board is envisioning. So what we're looking to do today is kind of recap that last conversation we had a few weeks ago. And staff came up with an amazing amount of things to throw at you at one time. So we're going to walk through those. On October 18th, we met with the committee of the whole, and the board made it clear that you wanted no video gaming parlors in our town. You had to be a restaurant or meet the parameters to have video gaming. And the village staff hears that. We've had that kind of standard policy for a long time. So we started going back to draft the definition for video gaming parlors so we can write it into the code and be even more specific that you cannot be here if you're a video game parlor. While sitting and talking about that, we went over the conversation the board had about the seating requirement. And it started to go back and forth, and with Mike, myself, Natalie, and Kevin, our attorney, eventually we brought in the mayor as the liquor commissioner, sit down and talk to us, because the seating, what we found out, if you remember from a while back, we had a conversation about how seating is determined. And it turns out that our seating isn't well defined, and I'm going to get to that as we walk through it. So we decided that that was something we wanted to bring back to the board to talk about tonight. And so ultimately, if you look at that last bullet point, that's why we're here. You know, we work to craft liquor code changes that will help the staff working with new businesses while determining that they're actually in line with the intent that the village board has for video gaming in the community. And we know that means no video game parlors. We're just trying to clarify other things in the code so we can help businesses along. So in our current review process on the next slide, when someone comes, it's not like they come to the village and say, hey, I want a video game. I mean, sometimes they do. And when they do, that's easy. You know, oh, you want a video game. So what's your makeup going to be? And you kind of figure out what they are as far as if they're a video game parlor or not right away. Most of the time, that's not how it works. And truth is, they don't have to tell us they're video gaming or want a video game. A restaurant can come in at any time and ask for a liquor license, never tell us anything about video gaming, and then simply get video gaming through the state once they have their liquor license. It would be then on our ability to have to go back and enforce it if they fall out of line with our code. So what we try to do is try to catch it. If someone brings up that they want video gaming at the time that they actually start the application, we usually say, okay, well, here's what the code says. So a lot of times people provide us a seating chart, they'll provide us a menu, and then we go over the section of our code that talks about kitchens with dedicated cooks and the seating requirements. Next slide, Dave. So I'm just going to show you, it's in the memo. This is the seating requirements we have. And as you can see, you know, there's standalone buildings, multi-unit buildings, class A large restaurants, small restaurants, limited restaurants. And they're, 75 seats to start, or 125 seats to start, then 75 after 2 years, or 50 after 2 years. And kind of going through all of these with everybody, we started looking at this and realized that some of the seating requirements, we're starting to designate our size of restaurant by chairs and not necessarily by the actual size of the building, which, as our attorney pointed out, is if you're thinking large and small, you usually are thinking about large and small in the size of your structure or your building. So what we decided to do was, let's look at the seating requirement, let's look at everything, let's look at the building and the liquor code in general as it pertains to classifications where there's video gaming allowed. So the next slide is kind of starting off the conversation. How can we clarify the liquor code, giving the staff guidance, ensuring that we're moving forward with businesses while meeting the village board's vision? Well, what I've learned is there is a lot of discretion right now in what kitchens are viewed as. We have a business in town that has a liquor license that is looking to open in the next few months over by the turf room. And that was one where we had to sit down with the mayor as the liquor commissioner. Mike and I and Natalie, when we all looked at it, we said, this is a restaurant. But then based on some of the board feedback we got recently, we said, I'm not sure it's a restaurant now. We have to ask the mayor if it's a restaurant. So we all look at it on paper and said, it meets the definition in our mind. But then based on some of the feedback, I'm not so sure. We ended up deciding that we've already granted them, so to speak, the liquor license with the assumption that they're going to open. They have a person cooking actual fresh food. But the question becomes, is not every restaurant is the same. So some restaurants don't require an elaborate kitchen to be, but you and I would know them as a restaurant if we saw it. So I'm going to go through that a little more. What's also confusing is zoning and liquor codes don't always go together. So if you asked Mike Toth what a restaurant is in the zoning code, should just ask me, it's right there. But I mean, it's basically anywhere where you can get food. I mean, a coffee shop is a restaurant in our zoning code. So, but in our liquor code, a restaurant once again ties back into having to have a kitchen with a cook. And that was to keep video gaming parlors out. Okay. So the last thing we say is seating numbers don't always equate to bigger spaces. So just because you have an adequate number of seats to meet our code doesn't mean that you're actually a bigger business. And so the next slide is we're going to start going through the changes that the staff was looking at to bring to the board. So the first question is, what is a large restaurant versus a small restaurant? So as I said earlier, we define it based on seats. So if you're a multi-unit building, and so let's say this, like you're a storefront in a strip center, if you can have 75 seats or more at the time that you open, you're a large restaurant. If you're a standalone business, standalone building, and you can have 125 seats or more, you are a Class A business. If you're a Class B license, if you have less seats. So what we started looking at was, what are actual sizes of restaurants in our town? And Mike did some quick research based on what units are being marketed in our community in storefronts, multi-unit buildings right now. And as you see, the range goes from roughly 1250 to 1920. So that's only, I think, 3 places we found, but just quickly of what was available in town. But that's indicative. The staff would say anything less than 2,000 square feet is typically a bigger building or a bigger standalone entity. We're not seeing a lot of storefronts over 2,000 square feet. So what we're proposing to do is first get rid of seating as a way to define what a large and small restaurant is, and simply say a large restaurant is bigger than 2,000 square feet. A small restaurant is smaller than 2,000 square feet. And then what we would also do is get rid of the designation of standalone and multi-unit buildings, because they're interchangeable in ways. A standalone building can be smaller or bigger than a multi-unit building, we're finding out. So it's just confusing to have that in the code when really the size is what dictates if it's a large or small restaurant.
Makes sense.
So the next slide is the seating requirement. This is the one where we had the most conversation, I think, last time we talked. So I thought it was smart to bring it back and let's actually go through what the current process is. So the North Aurora Fire Protection District does capacity checks upon request. Sometimes they will come in and do periodic checks on businesses as well. And so what we found out is when using current building and fire codes, there are different ways to measure capacity. It is not as easy as just saying how many people can fit in a building. There's a different measurement for the amount of chairs you can have. If you're considering tables and chairs, there's a different measurement for that. There's a different measurement for if you have a video gaming area. There's a different area, the way they decide of how much space a bar stool should take up. So what we do is the most common is we say we need seats, right? You need 75 seats to open up your first year, or 50 after 2 years in some cases. So if you're simply looking at seats, somebody can come in and give us a chart that shows, and it's happened, where they've given us charts that show 75 seats, table seats. We look at it and say, that looks fine. Fire district might come back in and say, well, they have tables and chairs here. That's a different requirement. So chairs require only 7 square feet per person. Tables and chairs requires 15 square feet per person per code. So if you look at our current, we put an example in here. So if you look at our current liquor code, an establishment can come in and show us a chart that shows 75 seats, but not actually meet what we think the board's intent is. Essentially what they're doing is they can show us on paper they have 75 seats, but that doesn't make them any bigger of a business, because you can get a small space and figure out a way to show us 75 seats on a real small unit. So what we were looking to do is create a capacity standard and based on square footage, removing the ambiguity that creates, and it creates a more enforceable standard to meet your intent. And by doing that, what we're thinking of doing is getting rid of the whole requirement of seating and just saying that you have to be able to have 50 people occupancy in your building based on a measurement of 15 square feet per person, which is the most restrictive of the codes we looked at with the fire protection district. So by that logic, and it goes back to one of the trustee comments we got last meeting. If a business comes in and says, okay, here's my plan, and Mike Toth sits down because he's really good with a scale and he measures it all out and says, you have X number of square feet of dining and video game area. We count it all as one outside of the kitchen. So basically the non-kitchen area. Based on that, divided by 15 square feet per person, you can have X number of people. Now we know, okay, they meet the intent of what the board's looking for, but we're not forcing them to cram in chairs or tables. At that point, the business owner can go back and decide, well, I can fit 80 people here, but I'm only going to put enough for 50 or 60 because I want my table spread more out. I don't want to have to meet that 75. I just want to put enough tables for 40 or 45, how I feel my restaurant should be. So that was one of the other things we're looking at. And I'm going to go through a summary at the very end. So next slide, please, Dave. And then there's the kitchen and cook requirement. So not all restaurants require a full kitchen in the traditional sense. One of my favorite cuisines is sushi. They don't require a full restaurant. There's not a full kitchen needed to be that, but I think a lot of people would consider a sushi establishment as a restaurant. So the argument would be, based on our code, you couldn't have a deli, you couldn't have a sushi establishment be a restaurant. Now zoning code says it's a restaurant, but because it's not, doesn't have that, full kitchen, does it have a cook? Is that considered a cook? Someone who's preparing raw fish? Is someone who's putting pizza in the oven at a pizza parlor considered a cook? And so there's no definition for that in the code. So that's where it leaves that ambiguity for the staff. And we're looking at it and say, in this case, we have the crepe restaurant that wants to open up. And Mike and I are doing research on what crepe machines are needed to make crepes. And does it require a physical cook to cook them, which apparently it does. Is someone actually going to be sitting over that crepe machine and stirring it and whatnot in front of people? Is it a real kitchen? Because it's not a huge kitchen, but it is a large prep area where people can watch them cook in front of them. And those are the types of things where we want to make sure that we're doing the job the board wants us to do. So what we're proposing is anyone who would come forward with a liquor license from now on, as part of our liquor code, we would put in any category where video gaming is required or is allowed, they would be required to go to the village board at this committee and present at that time their kind of their floor plan, their business model, what they actually want to do. It's instead of just going straight to board for the discussion of the liquor license, you would get a chance to vet it out a little bit more at a committee level first. We could talk about changing the process of our application internally, which would be, do you have intention to video game up front? And that would be something we can convey to the board right away. Truth is, if they say no, a business might always come back and ask the, video game later. And that might be something after the fact. But what we'd like to do is try to catch that at the beginning. So even if they never bring up video gaming, the board can bring it up at the conversation at the COW meeting. And get that feel for what is your kitchen? Like, do you have full-time people cooking in the back? What kind of food prep are you doing? And this way you can vet it out and decide whether or not you feel comfortable that meets the criteria. Gives you the flexibility to allow businesses in town that are on that borderline where you're not sure if it meets the code, but it does meet the intent.
I like that idea. And I also like your square foot idea. I think that makes sense. Instead of trying to figure out, somebody give you a little map and say, well, we can get 80 seats. This way it's square footage wise. We have a formula, 15 square feet with the table. I think those are all real good, Steve. So
Well, thank you.
I know you did a lot of study on work. So I just want to say that I think you're going in the right direction from my perspective.
Dave, last slide, please. So here are the summary of changes. What we want to do is establish that a Class A restaurant is 2,000 square feet or bigger, base it on square feet. Ability to have video gaming would be if you have 50 people in the dining and video gaming area using 15 square feet per person as a rule of thumb. Establish a new minimum requirement for a Class B small restaurant, which would be less than 2,000 square feet. Also, so that it's uniform, they would also still have to have 50 people in the dining area as well. And establish a new minimum requirement for Class C. So the Class C, I didn't talk much about, but the Class C, the Class J1, and the Class T basically follow our current Class B license that requires 50 people minimum right now. We just think it should just be uniform, so it's still 50 people for any of those establishments as well. Remove the 2-year waiting period, because if you meet the space requirement, what we're saying is if we're basing it on square footage and the board is getting to vet each and every single one of these before they open, if you've already established it's a restaurant, there's no reason to necessarily make them wait 2 years to come back. And then require all licensees, as I said, to go to the village board for review every time they open. And I think there's another check and balance here. So if someone comes to the board, if someone opens up their business and we don't think that they are honestly opening the way they were supposed to, we literally had a similar situation recently where someone showed us a chart, showed us a menu, opened up with a completely different menu from what they told us they were going to do. And there we clearly gaming up front as opposed to being a restaurant, did not have a full-time cook. And what do? The liquor commissioner immediately brought them in, threatened suspension, fined them. They had to reach compliance by a certain date, and they did. And that would be the checks and balance. So if someone ever came through and tried to sneak through and do it a different way, we hang our hat back on that first definition that says we don't allow video gaming parlors. You don't meet this. The board didn't think you met this. You showed up. You did something different. We think you're a video gaming parlor. Now you have to meet with the liquor commissioner. So that's what we're proposing to do. I didn't go over the example. I should have real quick, but just on quick math, on a 1,500 square foot unit, what we determined was if you were doing chairs only, you could fit 107 people in that unit. If you're doing tables and chairs, you can fit 50. So that was the difference. And that was the average size we kind of came up with, was around 1,500. That's why we used that number.
I just, when it says chairs only, I did the math at home. I read all of this before I came in. It's a little over 2 2/3 square foot, 2 2/3 feet on each side is 7 square feet. I think that's for a stadium type or an auditorium type seating arrangement where the chairs are in a line, kind of like out here, rather than someplace where you would eat. Or are they going to have the food in their lap if they don't have a table to eat off of?
So we had someone brought up that same question today earlier. And so there's different, I would say that there are different ways that restaurants have eating areas. They have bar areas that aren't tables. So they sit at a counter. There are establishments that have counters that people can pull up a chair and actually have a line of chairs up against the wall. I know one establishment in town that has that. So where you can literally just sit staggered in chairs up against the wall.
Like a diner.
Like a diner. And when you do that, you are actually squeezing more. Technically, you're meeting the code because you're squeezing more people in by putting chairs on a counter than you are tables.
If I could too for a second, the codes differentiate, and the building code is similar to that of the fire code, which we found, and basically it separates between assembly uses with fixed chairs, like your booths, your stadium seating, or anything, a bar top. And what that does, it actually starts to measure. You actually start micromanaging the width of the seat. You have to go in and measure, is it 24 inches, is it 18 inches? So it does an actual occupant count based upon a measurement of the actual seating spaces. With the assembly without fixed seats, that means you can have free roaming tables and chairs, standing room only. It differentiates between concentrated with chairs only, which is what Steve mentioned, 7, and then standing space would be 5 square feet per occupant, and then the unconcentrated tables and chairs is 15. So if it's a fixed, it actually takes a different measurement per occupant, which gets very specific with the measurement of each booth or each chair count, whatever it might be.
Well, I still think we should keep it to 15 square feet per person regardless. I don't think the 7 square foot applies except for that one place that you're talking about.
No, this would be, we're proposing that every liquor license would be 15 square feet per person.
Right, yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Right.
The question I have for that is when you remove any sort of seating requirement, are you, you're basing a decision on whether or not to grant the liquor license on whether the facility is capable of having 50 people, but there's no requirement that they actually put tables and chairs in there, is there?
No, there isn't. In this case, it would be the discretion of the board to determine whether or not they are meeting that requirement when they come to the board. And then afterwards, if they put in, let's say, 10 chairs and they clearly are operating as a video gaming parlor, then we just go after them. And ultimately, we can pull their liquor license if they are found to be operating as a gaming parlor, in which case they without a liquor license, they can't video game.
But how can we pull their license if we don't define in our code that some requirement that they actually put in tables and chairs? I like the idea of the square footage, but they're going to come in there and say, my square footage meets the minimum requirements, and then never put one table in there and just go in and apply for, and they could serve food and meet the definition of a restaurant. But I don't understand what authority we would have to pull them out and say, no, you're a gaming parlor, when they actually showed us that they meet the minimum requirements, unless we have some definition that they have to have tables on site. Am I wrong about that, Kevin?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, part of the answer would lie in the fact that we would require them to provide a diagram of what their dining room looks like. And they would be representing in the application that this is the layout of our dining room. If their layout shows no tables and, minimal chairs or whatever, obviously that's going to stick out and is going to generate some discussion. On the other hand, if they come in with a diagram that shows, tables and chairs like you would expect in a restaurant, and then when they actually go and open up and they don't have any tables and chairs, again, that's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So I think making people come in front of the board and represent in their application and represent to the board what it is they plan to do is part of the answer. But you're right about that in terms of, if there isn't a requirement, it's an issue. But I think it's an issue that could be addressed in the fact that they have to present and make a representation in the application and to the board.
So we have a business that we're working with, as we said earlier, that brought an interesting point of view to us that since we're not construction builders either, we don't understand the process that they go through when they design their building. So when this restaurant came to us, they presented a seating chart of 75, 72, and then we said, you need 3 more. So they came back with 75. So they met the chart. Then they came back, all of a sudden their build out was for 42 tables and chairs for 42 people. So Mike and I immediately are like, okay, now what is this? Well, it turns out that capacity wise, based on this number, they actually can have like 65 people there. So it is reasonable that they have more than the 50 per se for their area. The issue is, and Mike's better at building code stuff than me, but once you hit 50 in certain cases, the architect was telling them that they had to modify the building now to be different. They had to put a secondary access point into the building that wasn't there before. And then the other thing they have to do is they have to widen the bathrooms. And by expanding the bathrooms, they're actually reducing the dining room size, then actually reducing the amount of people they can actually have in the building.
Yeah, what the beauty of the actual square footage that we're establishing directly in the liquor provisions, that it's basically exclusive of anything else going on. So if the fire district adopts a new code, if we adopted, the 2021 building code series, if there's a new ADA standard that they have to meet, that doesn't matter. We have our provisions written into our code and that sets our standard because codes change all the time. And that's the issue, is that one code for a different district might have a different code requirement than the other. So this gives us a basis to work specifically through the liquor license code and not have to worry about the provisions that are being adopted by every other district or regulating body out there.
I make no mistake, I'm in favor of the square footage provision that, as you guys have written it, you guys have done a great job. That my issue is, what if we have an applicant that really just wants a video game parlor? But in order to get around it, they come in and they say, they don't even have a diagram, or they have a diagram with 0 tables, but they meet the 15 square foot per. What authority do we have to challenge him? Because if these things are so lucrative, why wouldn't he just say, you guys didn't define it in your code, I'm going to sue you if you deny it? And is it, in all seriousness, are they going to win? Is it, without having some definition of you got to have 25 tables? And I think that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. If we want seats for 50 people, we want 50 people in there. We don't want 40 people because that's what they can fit. We want 50 people. And if they have to add to their square footage to make that happen, that's on them, not on us.
We cannot grant or deny video gaming licenses per se. We can only control this through the liquor code. So basically it gets controlled through the issuance of a liquor license or the denial of the issuance of a liquor license. There is no property right to a liquor license. So we can exercise discretion in regard to whether to grant a liquor license or not, because nobody has a property right to a liquor license until one is granted. And then once a liquor license is granted, you can't just take them away without some cause. But so really the answer is at the beginning. The answer is at the time when they apply for a liquor license. That's when we have discretion to say yes or no.
I have a question on that very topic. If a person comes here with a business and presents a plan that includes enough seating for 50 people, and then when they open, I think this is where Trustee Carroll is getting. Right. When they open, they don't fulfill that plan. They just operate without it. Do we have some legal recourse?
I think we do if we are careful. So for instance, they've represented that they're going to have 50 seats. We can condition the issuance of the liquor license on what they represented to us.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's what we're talking about. And what we
that helps, Kevin. That explanation, that's what I was looking for.
And I'm sorry, Trustee Carroll, I should have clarified that. But at the time that they issue the liquor license, or excuse me, the application to us, what we would expect is that when they present their concept to the board, they would show you a floor plan. So if it was egregiously different, then that would be a red flag right away that said, oh, they showed us 75 seats and they put 3 in, okay, this is weird. We got to go in there and check it out.
Okay, then that answers my question. The only other issue I have with the proposal is I'm not in favor of removing the 2-year requirement. Generally, I'm against the gaming anyway, so obviously, but I think, to avoid the situation we're talking about, I would want to see them be an established restaurant for 2 years.
So Trustee Carroll, so I get this right. Are you saying that by this, if we switch to square footage, you would then want any establishment coming in to wait 2 years before they can video game at all?
Yeah.
Let me add in another thought that I had as we were talking, because we're kind of assuming, I think, in part of this that, people who come in for a liquor license and who want to do video gaming are going to lay that on the table when they come in and get approval for a liquor license with video gaming, but that isn't necessarily the way it would work. You know, someone could come in, get a liquor license, and then come back in 6 months or a year and seek a video gaming license. And at that point, we've already issued the liquor license, so it's like we can't take away the liquor license. And I think having the 2-year requirement, unless it's granted at the time that the initial license is given, may make some sense to avoid that kind of an issue.
I think what might help with that same issue is if we do, like I think you suggested earlier, Steve, is to have that question up front on the application process. Are you planning on either having a gaming operation either now or sometime in the future? I think that might be helpful as well. So I'm kind of in favor of, after listening to what Kevin just said, of supporting that idea of the 2-year.
The other thought that I had, and I'm throwing some things out, so I apologize to Steve on this because we didn't talk about any of this, but I'm just kind of thinking out loud as we, you know, as we're going here. You know, we have supplemental outdoor license. We have other types of supplemental licenses. We could make it a supplemental video gaming license so that it actually has to be approved separate of the underlying video license. So that's just a thought. I'm throwing it out there. We haven't talked about it. So, you know, it's a brand new thought.
So one thing that sticks out to me is we had this discussion, what, a month ago or so as a board? And at that time, the whole 75 seat, I guess, question thing was a main topic that nobody up here wanted to change. And all of a sudden now this is not talking about seats, but it's talking about people. So now before we were not happy or didn't want to reduce the number from 75 to 50, whether it was seats or whatever. Now this is automatically going down to 50. And I don't hear anybody up here saying they have a problem with that. So it was kind of like mixed arguments here as a board. You know, before 75 was our minimum.
I think the number, it's not arbitrary. I think it's something that we need to establish to ensure they're not opening just a gaming parlor. You know, if you've got 40, 50 people in there, that's not just a gaming parlor. They now have to have, you know, food, drinks and things like that. I'm all for having, you know, having the 50 people. I mean, I would like to see something there. We can't just say you don't need anything because then it is going to be a gaming parlor. And
Absolutely.
they'll scoot a couple seats in when the inspector walks in.
Yeah, my concerns are the same as Trustee Carroll as well, in terms of, you know, getting duped, I guess. I guess the other thing is.
Let's keep in mind what our goal is. We don't want gaming parlors.
Correct.
I don't care what the number is, as long as it's substantial enough and to sit here and go back and forth 7 feet, 15 feet. The goal is we don't want a gaming parlor. So we need to have some sort of a structure and a framework.
Right.
I'm fine with what we have here. I think this is very well planned, very well thought out.
Yeah. I was going to say the other option. I mean, what if instead of making all these changes, can we not just say we were to stick with our current regulation? Like if there's an odd situation where you know, they had the plan, it had 75 seats, 50 seats, whatever you want to say. And then the fire department said, oh, you can't fit that many. Can they come for a variance to us as a, you know, to us as a board and say, okay, we know you're acting in good faith and we see the problem here and we can grant it, you know?
I think the issue for us is when we look at it and when someone shows you a seating chart or comes to the board and shows you a seating chart and you see 75 without measuring it out and so it looks like a good plan, you are taking it on good faith that they're going to put that 75 seats in. But then when you find out that 75 seats, if it doesn't have that definition tied to it, that in theory they can change it up, still meet the code, and we might be forcing them to have an unsafe situation in their business in order to, because they want video games. So they'll be like, well, the village approved it, so I'm going to shove these 75 seats in there because I met their code. I think no matter what happens, whether it's a separate license, which isn't a horrible idea, to talk about making it a supplemental separately, because then it would require a business to come back to the board every time. What I would say is you're actually doing that right now. With these changes, you're forcing the first meeting with the board up front. We could always go back and say, if at the time your liquor license is granted that you didn't get authorized to do video gaming, that you have to come back later for a supplemental, you can do it that way, and that would be your catch-all. So everyone goes through this process, everyone goes to the board, shows them your floor plan, everything's here. And the board says, you're good to go. If you want a video gaming, you have our blessing. If you don't go through that process, you just say, well, I don't want video gaming. But then a year from now, you try to get video gaming, you'd be like, no, our liquor code says if you didn't get the approval at the initial liquor license approval, you need a supplemental license from the board, and that requires board action.
Bring it back.
And you bring it back in.
I like that idea.
I like that idea.
To Todd's point though, about the 75 seats, I mean, originally, I think that's how everybody viewed it. That was the kind of the first run through 10 years ago, whenever we did it. But there's a lot of ambiguous items in this where staff was just too much back and forth and what's a kitchen. And I think they were looking for, like, this is a clear direction, easy to, hand out to a business that comes, the 75 seats, like Steve Bosco said, one restaurant now, I mean, they packed it in. The fire department, I don't think even came through to verify it. I mean, they're just trying to do whatever to meet the 75 seats. And I don't think may not be the safest. It certainly isn't for the customers. I mean, they're just all jammed in there. And then, so the square footage was important. Trustee Curtis mentioned a couple months ago about the business deciding how many seats. And to some degree, I think if it can hold, the square footage and they only want 50 seats, I mean, that would make sense too. My concern is somebody got a liquor license and they come back and now they want the gaming. And I like the supplemental idea or something there where it's two separate things. I think that would really make sense.
Keep in mind too, that we currently don't have a definition for video gaming in the code, and we're going to add, a video gaming parlor, we're going to add one. And the definition basically is that a video gaming parlor is a business where video gaming is the primary business. And so, you may not know necessarily up front. I mean, someone may say, well, yeah, food's our primary business. But if there's some question, you just go look at the books. And if they've got 75% video gaming.
We can do that because there's probably one now in town that's questionable.
And 25% food, well, they're a video gaming parlor. They're not a restaurant. So, we're adding that in there that gives us some ability to enforce and also to, measure.
I like the idea of a supplemental license. I think that we do want to encourage restaurants to come to the village. We want to encourage business while maintaining that, we don't want gaming parlors, right? But we want to encourage the business to come. And I think with the supplemental license and having to come with the plan and the board, I think you've covered all the bases. I'm generally in favor of it. And I think that it's going to go a long way toward clarifying for the board and the staff what they need to do.
To Trustee Nedved and Trustee Carroll's point, is there some way that is there a minimum standard? I mean, we have the ability to write that in to the code. Is there a minimum standard of what you like to see? And it doesn't have to be a real number. And what I mean by that is you have a set standard now for space that you need to game. You have to have this 15 per person square footage. But if you say, well, just because you have space, you don't want it to be a rec room where it's basically just wide open. Do we want to put in there that you have to, be in line to some degree? Because we want flexibility, I would assume, with our businesses too, because nobody wants to hand the board a floor plan and never be able to move a chair without being like, oh, is this going to put me in jeopardy because I moved 3 tables to the left? I mean, the idea would be is you present the plan to the board. Would you be willing for them to have like a loose standard in there that would be added that would say something like, you would have to establish a setting that appears at a restaurant as far as having tables and chairs in a reasonable setting to conducive for an eating environment, something like that.
Use the term.
Or
Reasonable.
what about a percentage? Like a minimum, you have a percentage of the total available seating capacity. Do it 80% or something like that, not to fall below, or 60%. If it, you have to have seats for 60% of your total available seating capacity.
Okay, so almost like we have now, where we can go into a building and say, well, you didn't have the 75 seats, so that's your first strike. You're saying that if they say they're gonna have, I'm just throwing a number out for easy math, 100 seats. And you're saying that 60% has to be, so they have to have 60 seats somewhere in that establishment. Then by that logic, when we come in, we simply check the floor plan they provided us and say, well, X percentage is this. You have less than that, you need to put 2 more tables in here or not.
Well, right. I mean, here, whatever that for, like, if Mike comes up with a formula that says this is what is based, this is what you could have based on the square footage, the 15 square foot per person. In at no time, you can't then just turn around and have 0 tables or 10% of the tables. You have to have some sort of a minimum. And if it's 50% or 60%, whatever's gonna satisfy the village and satisfy the owner, I think is fine, just as long as there's some attempt to provide seating.
See, the only issue I have with that and for enforcement and whatnot and going in there measuring and counting chairs and tables is it in a way, a business that wants to meet that code, if they truly are a video gaming parlor, they're just going to put enough tables and chairs to meet the code again. So if you say it's, oh, you have 100 seats on your floor plan, so you need 60. If they're operating truly as a gaming parlor and only putting 40 out, they're just going to put 20 more chairs out and tables to make it look like they're a restaurant. Either way, going back to what Kevin Drendel was saying, when we looked at the one establishment in town that we thought was usurping the code, we looked at several methods. We made site visits. We went on their Facebook page. We went on their website. We made phone calls to the business. We attempted to order food. I mean, we literally went to all these different ways and marked off several check boxes that said, nope, you are not a restaurant. And because none of them, it didn't add up based on what we were seeing. They were advertising as a casino. That's another thing, you know, is it?
Are you hiring slot attendants?
Exactly. They're not hiring cooks. They were hiring slot attendants online. And so like there's a 10 different ways that you can look at somebody and say, okay, they're clearly being a video gaming parlor here, not a restaurant. That I think opens it up for Mark as the mayor, as the liquor commissioner, to bring that back. And I think that the trigger is if they show the board up front that they're coming in with a concept and they clearly aren't following that concept, that's the biggest red flag right there. I'm going to put 70 chairs in, but I only put 12 in. To me, that is, okay, something's amiss here immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do like, Steve, to answer your question, I do like bringing them back and separating the licenses, having a supplemental license, because then at least you can tell when they come back how they're performing as a restaurant or a bar or whatever it is.
So what I would envision, based that Kevin just threw that supplemental idea out there, which is good. At the time that they originally come in, would they then ask for the supplemental at the same time? And then anyone who didn't get it would just have to come back in later. So they would still have to, the original, let's say Mike is opening up a business and he comes in, he's getting a Class A, he would still also need to get the supplemental license at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if you get the Class A and 2 years later, you want a video game, you come back and then, but you get your supplemental.
Right.
Okay.
So-
And then we don't have an arbitrary waiting period, but they still have to come back into the board.
All right.
I like that.
Good.
I'm good with that.
Okay, so
All right.
I think what next step for us is Kevin and I will sit down and we'll work on putting together a supplemental classification for this, bring back all the liquor code changes to a board meeting. And if anybody has any questions, obviously this is super complicated, just let me know.
Very good.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep, very good.
And you know, we'll see how this goes too. I mean, there's nothing to say we can't come back again a year from now going, didn't work, or
Yeah, right.
fine tuning it.
Hey, thanks, Steve and Mike, though, for all your hard work. I know you guys are working hard on this, and we appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
Kevin.
All right. Anything else? Steve?
No, we just have an executive session tonight.
Right. So motion adjourn, the exec session.
Motion to adjourn?
Regarding
Motion to
Second.
adjourn, you have
property
to,
acquisitions.
yep, you have to mention what it
I was
is.
trying to get it out. Yep. So motion and a second. All
Second.
Second.
right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same. All right, thank
We
you.
actually have to have a roll call vote because we have somebody remote, technically.
Sorry.
Okay, roll call.
Because of the state rule for allowing remote access, when the board member's not present, they want full roll call votes.
All right, trustee Carroll.
Here. Yes.
Trustee
Nope.
Trustee Curtis.
Yes.
You're saying yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Trustee Gately,
Yes.
trustee Lowry,
Yes.
trustee Nedved,
Yes.
trustee Salazar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.